We're on chapter 11, where we're going to talk about learners who are deaf or hard of hearing. Here's a verse that goes along with this chapter. Be opened. At this the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. That's from the book of Luke in the New Testament. Of course, that deals with Jesus healing someone who could not speak because he was deaf. And Jesus, of course, knew that he had to first heal the man's hearing so that he could hear, and then he would be able to speak. And of course, that's a bona fide miracle because the man could speak plainly immediately. Now, in real life, when people have surgeries and things on their ears, that's probably not going to happen. They're going to need therapy for a length of time, but that's okay. Let's move on. On slide 3, you need to click on the link, and it takes maybe a minute or two to load, or you may have to download an Adobe Shock Flash Player or something like that. But then you'll see the parts of the ear that you need to know. And you'll need to be able to identify them because on your next test, I'm going to have a picture of the ear and those parts, and you'll have to label them. Oh boy. So go ahead and look at that and find out what those terms mean. Like, what exactly does that part of the ear do? For the most part, of course, it's conducting sound to the next part of the ear and the next part of the ear. That's the simplistic way of saying it. But take a look at those, and some of them you probably can figure out how they got their names. So think about that while you're looking at it, and come back and go to slide 4. Now, for a child to qualify under IDEA to receive therapy for being deaf or severely hard of hearing, then the student's speech has to be so severe that it cannot be understood even if the child is wearing hearing aids or some kind of hearing device. If you watch this little YouTube video, it seems kind of funny and familiar in the beginning, but if you kind of catch what's going on, you'll begin to realize, oh, they're giving me a model here, or a simulation rather, of what it would sound like if I had mild loss, moderate loss, or severe hearing loss. And in my case, I have mild moving toward moderate hearing loss. So I do miss the beginnings and endings sometimes of sentences or things people are saying, or I have difficulty understanding if I'm in a crowded restaurant or somewhere like that and more than one person near me is talking. But watch this video, and it's a pretty good example. Okay, now we're back on slide 5. Now, a child who's hearing impaired may not be totally deaf, but their hearing loss is to the degree that it affects their academic performance because they're missing out on a lot of what the teacher or the classmates are saying. And so in that sense, if you're missing part of what's being said, you may not follow directions, or you may not understand a lecture or something like that. So the video that's here demonstrates for you some of that. And then come back and go to slide 6. On this slide, you see sort of a silly picture, but it's telling you that for someone to receive help as being hearing impaired, if they're not deaf, they have to have a loss between 16 and 25 decibels of hearing. Most of you should remember from elementary school when you had to go take the hearing screening with the nurse, or maybe it was the speech therapist, and they put the little headphones on you. They're not big like in this photo here, but they put the headphones on you and you hear the beep sound, and you were told, touch the ear where you hear the beep, 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 right? And so that's how they begin to determine if you can hear or not. It's sort of amusing sometimes, though, to watch school nurses give the hearing test to little children, as I may have mentioned in a previous PowerPoint presentation, because they don't always understand the directions. It doesn't mean that they don't hear, but they're not comprehending what they're being told to do, following directions sometimes. Well, what are some types of hearing loss? And how many people have a hearing loss? Notice the number of people who have a true hearing loss is really low, less than 1%. Now, here's a couple terms you need to be familiar with: bilateral and unilateral. And it's pretty easy to remember. Bi, like bicycle, means the hearing loss is the same in both ears. And unilateral, if you know what a unicycle is, one wheel. Might have seen those in the circus sometimes. Well, the loss is more in one ear than the other, or maybe one ear the person has normal hearing, in the other ear they have some hearing loss. If you look at the slide below, you'll learn some more about different kinds of hearing loss, and I encourage you to do that right now. Okay, here on slide 8, we see 4 terms, 4 kinds of hearing loss. Conductive hearing loss, again, mild loss in both ears, okay, usually. Sensory neural, the sound may be coming into the actual ear, but there's some damage to the nerve that's going from the ear to the brain. So the sound is not getting to the brain, although it went into the person's ear just fine. Now this next term, central auditory processing disorder, is sometimes known as CAP, C-A-P. Okay, central auditory processing disorder. And what that one deals with is people who hear, in other words, auditorily they can hear all right physically, but they do not comprehend what they are hearing. A good example of that would be if you had a student and you said, okay, Tawanda, I want you to write your name on the top of the paper in the left-hand corner. I want you to put the date in the right-hand corner. I want you to number your paper 1 to 10 and then flip it over on the back and draw a circle. Can you remember all those steps yourself right now? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. And in little Tawanda's case, she has central auditory processing problems. So she heard the words the teacher said, but she can't retain and remember and follow that many directions. So the easiest thing for teachers to do if they know they have a student or two like that in their classroom is not to give multi-step directions, or put the directions up on the screen. If you're using a smart board or a whiteboard that you're writing on, or you have a poster on the wall, so that that person can look and see, okay, this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3, and they can follow along better that way. And they won't get lost with where they're supposed to be and what page they're on and in a book, and that's or what item you're calling out the directions for, and so forth. Some children have mixed loss, meaning it's combined. For instance, if they're not hearing all the sounds and they also aren't good at interpreting what they are hearing, that's known as a mixed loss. So that's just another term to be familiar with. Well, how do you know? And again, it's usually going to be the early childhood teachers, preschool teachers who will catch this. How do you know a child may have a hearing loss? I had a real good friend a number of years ago who thought that her little grandson was very stubborn because she would call his name and he would not come to her. And everyone in the family thought, boy, this little child is just stubborn and rude. And you call him to come in the room and he won't come, and you tell him to do things and he won't do them. Well, come to find out, they took him to the pediatrician and the child had hearing loss. So they felt very sad that they had been saying bad things about the child and fussing at the child for not doing things they wanted him to do. But he really couldn't understand because he couldn't hear them. And he needed surgery, and then he was fine. So if you notice developmental delays, in other words, if a child is 6 years old and still has trouble putting several words together to make a sentence, hey, that may be a developmental delay that's involving hearing. Even a 5-year-old, maybe even a 4-year-old. If the child looks confused when you tell him or her to do things, or ask you to say things over and over, and I have to admit I'm guilty of that one because of my slight hearing loss. I have to ask people sometimes to say things over again because I don't quite catch it the first time. Or if you see a little child pulling on their ears a lot, or hitting their ears, hitting the side of their head, sometimes that's because they're trying to turn that ear on. They're trying to be able to hear, and they don't know how. And they don't know how to tell you, I can't hear. So any kinds of symptoms that you see, especially in young children, and young meaning like first grade and younger, could be hearing loss. And the child may have gone unnoticed all the way through early childhood, up until the time they enter school. I've seen that happen. And it wasn't until the child came to school and the nurse did the early screening of eyes and vision, and the speech therapist did the screening, that they realized this child may have something wrong with the ears, and the child's sent to an audiologist, and they find out what's going on. Well, Who are some of the people who work with hearing and ears? School level speech and language therapists. They may do the initial screening on the child, or it may be the school nurse. If the child cannot pass the screening, either because he or she cannot understand the directions, or if the child maybe just can't hear, the parents will get a referral letter asking them to schedule an appointment with an audiologist and take the child in to get screening, because they have kind of different strategies and equipment, and they're more highly trained when it comes to determining if someone really has a hearing loss or not. Now, in the school setting, you have teachers of the hearing impaired. They can work with children a couple times a week, in many cases, sort of like a resource, almost, or itinerant model. Or there are even classes for children who are hearing impaired where they stay most of the day. Ear, nose, throat doctors, commonly known as ENTs, they also work with people who have hearing loss. And of course, in some cases, if the person is totally deaf and can lip read just a little, or maybe not at all, they may have a sign language interpreter in school. And that person may change out with other sign language interpreters throughout the day so that those adults can have a break. And so they can take turns signing for different children. Some of the characteristics of students with hearing impairments include things like being very dependent on the teacher. The child's constantly wanting to know if they're right, if they're doing things okay, help me, sort of thing. So and you feel sorry for the child sometimes, but you have to let the child realize you need to learn how to do things on your own. I will help you as much as I help others, and a little bit more if needed, but you need to try for yourself sometimes. Also, children sometimes get very frustrated, and they appear stubborn, or they are stubborn because they are frustrated and they don't know how to express themselves, or they're not understanding what they're being told to do. So they get angry. Now here's Maxine over here. She's kind of a crazy old lady you see in the comics sometimes. And read what she has to say about hearing loss as you age. That's Maxine, because she doesn't care what other people have to say. She only cares about what she thinks. Okay, next slide. Teacher tips. You can assign a child who has hearing loss in just one ear to the front of the room. Let their dominant, that is the strong ear, be the one that is, if you want to use the term, facing the class. So in other words, if my left ear is the good ear, you would sit me on the front row to where my right side is the one that's closest to the wall. My left ear then would be able to catch most of what's being said in the classroom. Another good tip, and this helps many children, is to put old tennis balls on the feet of desk. And I've seen a lot of teachers do that who don't even have hearing impaired children. They say, it cuts down on that sound when you drag desk and move them around. And they just like it a whole lot better. Plus, it's not scratching up the floor or putting marks on the floor. Acoustics in the classroom, that's something that can be worked on. Special ed department can talk with architects, and they can get paneling and things that can be put in a classroom for children who are hearing impaired, and sometimes that will help. Remember to face the child when you're talking. Nothing worse than you're back to this class and you're on the smart board or a whiteboard or chalkboard, if you still have those in an older school building, and you're not facing the child. You're just writing on the board and talking, because they can't see your lips. They can't see your mouth. They don't know what you're saying. Here's some more tips for you. Click on this video and watch it, and then come back to slide 13. If you have a child in your school who does have hearing aids and they're in your class, you'll be shown by either the speech therapist or the teacher of the hearing impaired how to check the hearing aid and make sure that it's working, how to make sure the battery's working. It's very simple. Very simple. It's like a little watch battery. And there's a little tiny door on the side you can open up and take the battery out, throw it away, put in the new battery. How do you know when they need a new battery? Well, the child may begin to point at the hearing aid or shake it in the head, like, I can't hear, I don't know what's going on. Or some hearing aids even emit a sound, sort of a tone. And when you hear that tone, you'll know that means one of the batteries is going dead. And then you go over and look at the hearing aid and you'll see which one it is. It usually has a red light on. The green light's usually on individual aids if it's working properly. Some children will have cochlear implants that are actually stuck to their scalps. And then there's oftentimes a wire that may go into the ear. Or the child may have an assistive listening device. In other words, they're wearing something, or there's a sound from the box that you might be wearing, which is kind of like a clip-on mic. Okay? And it uses regular batteries. A lot of times it's just a simple D battery. And you clip that on your clothes, you clip the mic up somewhere high up on your chest, and you talk. And sometimes the signal goes right into a child's hearing aids if they have them. But children with central auditory processing disorder may not wear hearing aids, but you may have 4 speakers up in the room. And there have been a lot of studies about this, and many teachers have said, I wish I had this all year long every year, because students pay more attention and they're hearing you better because it's coming out in surround sound. Well, click on this and you'll learn about some more things about cochlear implants, and then come back. All right, slide 14, assistive technology for the deaf. It's not just for senior adults, okay? And teachers, you'll be taught, the name of the device, how to recharge it, or if the device needs extra batteries, you need to have those on hand, then you'll be given some of those to keep, so that if need be, you can switch them out. Sometimes the parents are asked to send extra batteries for a hearing aid. Some, like some of the auditory trainers or surround sound systems, you just plug in and recharge overnight. So every day when you come in, you either check it, make sure it's working, or the child can do it. I had a student who used an auditory trainer in my class, and he was in 1st grade, 2nd grade, and was with me for a couple of years, and he soon learned how to fix his because he wanted it on, and he wanted it right then because he wanted to know what was going on in the classroom. The humorous thing about it was, though, speaking of that stubbornness trait, if he got mad at me or mad at the teaching assistant, he would turn off the device to show I don't have to listen to you anymore. The first time that happened, my teacher's aide got real upset and said, "That is so rude, that is so wrong. Look at what he just did. He's not listening to you." I said, "Don't worry about it. Look at me." I leaned over and pretended to whisper something to her. I said, "Now, while I'm whispering, you look at him." She did it, and sure enough, that little fellow turned that right back on because he wanted to know what I was saying about him. You have to be smarter than a 1st grader sometimes. But I had a lot of fun with that boy and really enjoyed watching him mature and grow during the couple of years that he was with me. All right, getting close to the end here, but sign language. If you've never tried before, see if you can spell your name. You can just spell your first name if you want to, but try that. See if you can do it more than one time and if you can get faster doing that. Now, this is just the alphabet, but you can take a sign language class and then you learn how to sign whole words so that you can speed up your repertoire, if you will. And in some colleges, they even count, if you become proficient in sign language, they count that as a foreign language. Even though there are 2 kinds, and usually in our country it's American Sign Language that's taught to people who are hearing impaired or deaf. But you can actually major in that in college too, or you can choose that as a language in lieu of taking something like French or Spanish if that's required at a college. Here's a very famous person, this young lady right here. Her name's Helen Keller. And this is Helen. This is her teacher, Ann Sullivan. Ann Sullivan was also slightly hearing impaired. Helen Keller was born deaf and blind. You may have heard of her before because she truly was a historic character in our nation's history. The way that she moved from being a young child who couldn't see, hear, or communicate in any way other than throwing a tantrum, with proper education, she moved into becoming someone who was very known all over our nation. She spent most of her adult life lobbying people in Congress and the President and the Senate and various state legislatures, trying to get them to pass laws and start programs in schools for people who were deaf or severely hearing impaired. If you've never seen her movie, The Miracle Worker, I really encourage you to watch that one night. There's a couple versions of it. I like the old black and white version that you'll see here. And when you click on this, you'll see probably arguably the most famous scene from the movie, The Miracle Worker. The person playing the young Helen Keller is Patty Duke. Now, she's an actress who's a bit older than I am, and you may not recognize her name, but you might recognize her son's name. His name's Sean Astin, and he's Mr. Frodo's friend. Now you may know who that is. Okay, and the other actress, I believe, is Anne Bancroft, who was a very noted actress in her time. There's also the play The Miracle Worker and Sunday After the Miracle, 2 different plays, and I was privileged to see one of those many years ago at Spoleto Festival in Charleston. But watch this scene, and you'll see where suddenly Helen Keller becomes aware of what this teacher is trying to tell her. And if you get a chance sometime, watch one of the movies, because it's a really inspiring teacher story. Even if it is old school and black and white, it's a very inspiring story. And I encourage you to look at it, or if you wish, the more modern version sometime. I love this quote by Samuel Clemens, otherwise known as Mark Twain. Kindness is the language the blind can see and the deaf can hear. Remembering to have patience with all children, regardless of their abilities or disabilities, is what really counts. That's what can help make you a caring, compassionate, and competent teacher. Thanks for listening in this time. See you in class.